Welcome back to the Pirate Republic. This is an audiobook presentation of Pirates of the Wild West, the first novel in the Storm of Time series, released one chapter at a time. In the last chapter, our pirates had arrived at the saloon in San Francisco called the Paris. It was a gambling hall that was owned by a woman named Colette Delaire. They were sitting at a blackjack table with an Englishman named Philip. Philip was the first to recognize their names, their likeness, and that they were pirates. If you're enjoying this story and would like to support the podcast, find signed books, or join the weekly Pirate Republic newsletter, you'll find all the details in the show notes. In this next chapter, the pirates are forced to confront the reality of what the storm has done to them, and the choices that now lie ahead. This is Chapter 4, Coming to Terms. Chapter 4, Coming to Terms. Colette looked quizzically at the man Philip referred to as Blackbeard. His long, wild beard was certainly black. The man had a galvanizing energy to him. His radiant eyes were penetrating with an intensity set against the deep tan of his face and dark brows. She had heard of pirates, of course, the most famous in her mind being Jean Lafitte, who was both hero and villain from her home of New Orleans past. Blackbeard, I'm afraid our paths have not crossed, nor have I heard of your reputation. That's all right, lass. The port of New Orleans was not one of my calls. Mostly spent my time in the North Carolina territory. Philip listened to Blackbeard's response and shook his head. Yes, of course, but the reason you haven't heard of him, Miss Delaire, most likely is that he's dead. Philip looked around at the table. Blackbeard's eyes narrowed, and Hornigold scowled at Philip. The little man gulped and switched gears. Well, obviously not dead, but rumored to be dead, he stammered. Like I said, Blackbeard and the rest of the pirate captains went down at sea. Philip looked around at all the pirates in the hall. They were never seen again. Blackbeard gave Philip a maniacal smile. You're seeing us now, ain't ya? He said in a low, threatening voice. You all died 150 years ago, off the port of Nassau. Philip said a bit louder than he intended. The two pirates at the table stared in silence at Philip for a moment. Then Hornigold burst into a raucous belly laugh. Blackbeard joined in, and neither man could control their laughter. Their pirate mates closed in with curiosity. Blackbeard slapped the wide-eyed Philip on the back. Hornigold was laughing so hard he nearly fell from his seat. What is it? Charlotte de Berry asked with an infectious grin as she arrived at the table. Ghosts! Hornigold said amid his laughter. He pointed at Blackbeard. You're a ghost, Thatch. What? Charlotte asked again, confused along with the others as all the pirates gathered around. Ah, you are a fine-looking corpse, Miss Charlotte, Blackbeard was able to say through gasps of laughter. What the devil are you two going on about? Jennings asked in irritation. This little Englishman says we've all been dead for 150 years, laughed Hornigold as he pointed at Philip. That's absurd, Jennings said without humor. Hornigold and Blackbeard's laughter was contagious to Anne Bonny, Mary, and Bart Roberts as they laughed along to the joke they didn't quite understand. Sam Bellamy smiled for a moment, but it faded as he looked around the setting. His heart began beating faster, and he felt a trickle of sweat drop down his back. What year is it? He asked Philip in a small voice. Philip only stared back without answering. Sam turned toward Colette and asked the same question louder. The rest of the pirates' laughter abated, and they slowly all turned to Colette, waiting for an answer. Colette curiously glanced at the group before answering. 1873? Colette was met with stares of disbelief. 1873, Philip confirmed quietly. You shut up! Hornigold screamed at him. Settle down, Benjamin, Blackbeard said, laying a hand on Hornigold's shoulder. Hornigold shoved the hand away and stood up. He slammed his fist on the table in front of Philip, startling the man, then strode angrily to the bar. Maria, I was supposed to go back to her, Sam said in a daze. And you will, mate, you will. Don't believe this horse shite. 1873, said Bart Roberts. Sam wobbled a bit and felt the room spin. He was planning to travel within a week back to Cape Cod with a hoard of treasure to marry his love, Maria. He had left her over a year ago to find his fortune. Maria's family would never have let her marry Sam when he was just a pauper. Now somehow he felt the truth that he was more than a century too late. He felt his insides tighten up, and he bolted out the door before he'd be forced to empty his stomach in front of the entire hall. The rest of the pirates watched Sam sprint out with a hand to his stomach and the other covering his mouth. "Thar she blows," Charlotte DeBerry joked and received a few chuckles. "I'd better go look after the bloke. See to it he doesn't get into trouble," Bart said before exiting after his friend. "Best watch he doesn't spoil your trousers with the last of his 18th century supper," Hornigold quipped as the laughter slowly died down. Jack Rackham's smile faded from his face, too. He looked at Anne, who bore this odd news with no effect at all. Jack stopped a man walking past and asked, "What year is this?" The man just gave him a drunken look and moved on. Jack moved to the other patrons, asking the same question. Those that answered gave him the same date again and again, 1873. Jack spun as Anne approached him. "Is it true? Could it be?" Jack asked her. "It must be. Everything feels different here," Anne said calmingly. Jack's eyes darted left and right. There was genuine fear in his eyes. "How? How is this possible?" Jack asked, to no one in particular. "It isn't possible, you buffoon," answered Jennings. He pointed his finger at Thatch. You did this. Something in that wine you served us. What did you do, you sodding bastard?" Blackbeard just quietly stared with a look of curiosity. Charles Vane, who had been uncommonly silent, slammed his fist on the table, jarring the cards and coin with the force. "You ingrate rat, answer the question. What did you do?" Black Caesar moved behind Vane in response, ready to intervene if it became necessary on his captain's behalf. Blackbeard put his hands on the table and half rose out of his seat to come face to face with Vane. "My doing? It's my ship at the bottom of this cold port, my prize, my treasure locked in its hold. God knows how many fathoms down." He looked hard at Vane, then at Jennings. "You two keep your tongues elsewise, I will cut them out and keep them myself," he growled. The three men looked ready to commit violence on each other. "Settle down, you overgrown piss-pot boys," Mary said, intervening. "Have you all missed the fortunate news in this?" "What fortunate news?" Jennings said without moving his eyes from Thatch. "We's free now. No more price on our heads. No more damned pardon. Woodes Rogers, the dreaded pirate hunter, is dead and gone 150 years. Spain, France, and England no longer seek our heads. King George rots in some grotesquely ornate grave in England." She turned toward Philip and asked, "What king reigns in England now?" "Victoria. Queen Victoria. She's sat on the throne for 35 years now," Philip answered in a state of awe. Blackbeard sank back into his chair. Jennings turned away and ran his hand over his bald head. Vane turned as well, surprised to come face to chest with the much larger Black Caesar. Vane sheepishly moved a safer distance from Blackbeard's second-in-command. Charlotte and Anne moved to Mary's side, with Anne taking her hand. The two women looked into each other's eyes with a fervent smile. "Queen Victoria," Mary smiled. "A woman rules Great Britain again. This is truly a fine future, a better world, and it's ours for the taking." She smiled and raised her glass. "So, drink up. Then let's plot how we get our riches back." Anne Bonny stood with her elbow on the bar, her hand supporting her head while she comforted the forlorn and mildly drunk Jack Rackham. She played with one of his long black curly locks with her other hand while he sipped a glass of local ale. The pirates had scattered to various corners of the hall to drink, talk, or just sulk in their own thoughts. None had seen Bart Roberts or Sam Bellamy return since they had learned of their otherworldly predicament. The pirates felt no desire to leave this drinking hall to enter the new world that they were now banished to exist upon by some unknown force or sorcery. Anne glanced over at Mary, sitting on her own. No one had engaged in her enthusiasm for the situation. She had eventually taken a bottle and sat near the man playing the piano. He wasn't really playing a song per se, but seemed to be working out a melody that was new to him, repeating it time and again before adding a bit more to the growing piece of music. Mary's red hair spilled from her hat as she gazed at a wall adorned with paintings of horses and cattle. Anne's mind wandered back to a time when she was unaware that Mary was a girl, disguising herself as a man. Mary had joined Calico Jack Rackham's crew under the guise of being a male. Not that that was a requirement in the pirate society. Anne had comically found Mary to be an attractive young man with similar colored hair as her own when they first met, and she sought to use their flirtations to make Jack jealous. It worked quite well until Jack became so enraged with Anne's interest that he wanted to kill Mary in a duel. Anne confided the truth about Mary to Jack, and for a time they were the only ones who knew Mary to be a woman. Jack had boasted that he was minutes from killing Mary in that jealous rage. In honesty, she wasn't sure that Mary would not have bested Jack with either the cutlass or pistol in that duel. It wasn't that Jack wasn't skilled at both, but not many were a match for Mary, or for herself in that regard. Anne knew full well that Mary had grown to detest Jack, mostly from Jack refusing a challenge from her now lost-at-sea husband, James. James had gone to Henry Jennings once he learned about the affair between her and Rackham. Jennings was captaining the fleet of ships that she, Jack, and James were a part of. Jennings was loath to have women on board ships, believing they were an unneeded distraction to the sailors. James had wanted Anne to be housed ashore, waiting on him, something that had pushed Anne away from her husband ever since they arrived in Nassau. Jennings offered to preside over a duel for the honor of Anne, but Jack had declined, claiming an injury which would make the duel unfair. In lieu of the duel, Jennings had decided Anne would be punished for breaking the vows of her marriage by 10 lashes that he himself would deliver. Jack was made to watch as Jennings dealt out the punishment with gusto, leaving Anne's back marred with scars from the lash. It had broken Anne's heart to see the tears that streamed down Jack's face as he was forced to watch her take that beating. He had pleaded forgiveness from Anne and assured her that once he was healed, he would deal both Jennings and James a thrashing they'd never forget. Mary, afterwards, as she tended to Anne's wounds, remarked that she knew of no such injury to Rackham, and wished that she had been present to accept the challenge in Jack's stead. Anne stared again at Jack's handsome face. She knew that they were destined to be together no matter what the world threw at them. She had joined him time and again sailing through the West Indies and all along the ports of the Americas, and now they would find new adventures in this time, in this place, throughout the seas of the Pacific. Luck was on their side now, with her husband James, now sleeping in a watery grave, leaving her in the fortuitous situation of being a widow. She was free to marry and make a life with Jack, the love of her life. An icy wind blew through the hall at this late hour as 4 dusty cowboys entered the saloon. They were dressed in long coats that fell to their shins. The tallest of the men removed his brimmed hat, revealing light brown hair, cut short and combed back away from a handsome face. One of the other men looked similar enough to be related, and the other 2 were shorter, with long mustaches, also looking like they could be brothers themselves. They searched the room with intense eyes, and Anne noticed that the other patrons made sure to avert their gaze from the men. She watched as they made their way to the bar where she stood with Calico Jack Rackham. The tall one moved with long, smooth strides, the shiny metal spurs attached to the back of his boots chiming with each step. He stood an arm's length from Anne with one boot planted on a brass rail that ran along the bottom of the bar. He set his hat on the counter and cracked a crooked smile at her before ordering a bottle of whiskey. One of his eyes had a slight squint, but they were both an intense blue she'd only seen presented by a clear morning sky while sailing across the calm Caribbean Sea. Her heart uncontrollably quickened, and she felt a flush upon her cheeks. "Me crew, me ship, me treasure, all gone," Jack bemoaned. Anne turned back to Jack with a start. She had almost forgotten he was there. "You still got me, Jack, and Mary. All's not lost. We just need to find us a new ship." Anne pushed his shoulder playfully. "Steal us a new ship." Jack rolled his eyes to the thick-beamed ceiling. "I don't belong here in the future. I want to be in me own time." Jack continued to grouse. One of the cowboys nudged the tall one. "Get a load of this pair, Jesse." Jesse, the cowboy who stood next to Anne, glanced over to her and Jack, looking them both up and down. "Haven't even finished one drink, and I'm not sure if I'm seeing 2 women or 2 men dressed as women," Jesse smirked. The other 3 men had a laugh. Jack, drunk and in a foul mood, gave an exaggerated sniff at the men. "Anne, I've finished all me drinks, and I can't tell if I smell men who shite their britches or pigs who've wallowed in shite. The man next to Jesse, who looked like his brother, slammed his shot glass on the table and moved aggressively at Jack. Jesse set his hand on his brother's shoulder to hold him back. "Now, Frank, take it easy. You know Mama says we shouldn't hit no woman, not unless she's really deserving of it." Jesse took Anne's chin in his hand, tilting her face up to his. "This little one is definitely a woman." Anne swatted Jesse's hand away, stepping back a bit. Jesse moved closer to Jack and towered over him. "This one, though, could be a woman. I can't really tell." "Cole, Jim, you got any ideas on the subject?" The other brothers answered in unison, one saying, "Girl," the other said, "Man." They turned and looked at each, then started laughing. Jack moved Anne behind him and puffed his chest out. He set his hand on the hilt of his sword. "I will not be insulted by your lot." Jesse moved his long duster from his hip and hovered his hand above the grip of his Colt revolver. "That so? You going to try poking me with that stick? 'Cause I'd be happy to fill your guts with a handful of lead." Jack grinned and moved his hand from the sword to the pistol secured to his waist belt. "Pistols it is, then," he said with a drunken gleam in his eye. The large Indian man serving drinks had silently arrived behind the bar with a double-barrel shotgun at his hip. "Outside, no killin' in the Paris," he said in thickly accented English. Jesse looked at the deadly shotgun pointed in his direction and smiled widely. All right. Save my bottle, native," he said. "I'll be wanting it when I return." "A duel it is then," announced Calico Jack Rackham. With a flourish, he whisked past the cowboys and toward the exit. Jesse bowed and extended his arm out for Anne. She gave a hateful look and followed Jack out. The cowboys laughed and headed for the exit. Vane and Jennings, who had been watching the last of the exchange, got up from their table to follow, and shortly after, the rest of the pirates exited along with the majority of the saloon's patrons, excited to see the drama that was about to take place.
Hope you enjoyed this chapter. Tune in next week to find out what happens when one of the most notorious outlaws and one of the most infamous pirates wind up in a gunfight on the streets of San Francisco in 1873. If you're a fan of pirates, go check out thepiraterepublic.com. It's a weekly newsletter that comes out every Friday. You can also toss a few doubloons our way by joining our Patreon at Patreon, The Pirate Republic. We'll see you next week. Till then, fair winds and keep a weathered eye.